Hi, everyone. Welcome to Clocking In with PilieroMazza, Labor and Employment News for Government Contractors. I am Sarah Nash, and I'm joined by my lovely partner.
Hi, Nicole Atala.
Welcome, Nicole. And we are going to talk to you today about, I think it's a really fun topic in labor and employment because it's always changing, which is probably makes it a headache for everyone else. But non-competes in the world of labor and employment, how they impact government contractors, what is going on. It seems like every day we have a new update about sort of how these things can be enforced, what rules apply. So, Nicole, can you just give us sort of a taste of what some of the most recent changes are looking like?
Sure. So, as of this summer, Minnesota, as of I think midsummer, June, July timeframe, they implemented their ban on non-compete. It does not ban non-solicitation necessarily, but it does ban, it's almost a complete ban on employees and independent contractors non-compete, which is a big change for Minnesota. That follows, California, Oklahoma, North Dakota. Also, the General Assembly in New York just passed a legislation. If the governor signs it, it will kind of follow in that same vein. Anyone that's providing services cannot be subject to a non-compete. Now, I will say that our non-competes in government contracting tend to be pretty narrow anyway. And because you can't exactly have a restriction that says within 10 miles, because we perform services all over the country, you can't narrowly tailor these things to a protectable interest as the law requires, unless if you have these geographic restrictions, like the time restriction is critical, and you either have to have a customer-based restriction or a geographical restriction in most states, right? So usually we're saying, you can't go to work for a competitor providing the same or similar services to a client anyway, right? But we're really trying to protect those key employees from like switching sides. That's usually what we're trying to do. We're going, recompete's coming up and people start moving around or thinking, who do we get in bed with because we really want jobs at the end of things, right? So we generally have these narrower customer-based restrictions anyway. That means that in more states, we won't be able to have the non-compete portion. We'll still generally, outside of California and perhaps Illinois, if you make less than a certain dollar threshold, be able to have the non-solicitation, which I would argue is sometimes harder to ferret out factually, but is usually what we're trying to get at anyway, right? We don't want folks they can go work for a competitor, but they can't work on the proposals. They can't give away our proprietary and confidential information. Usually when you get to brass tacks, that's what clients are trying to prevent against anyway. But what you need to do now is brush off those old agreements, because all of these new laws, even in California, Virginia, Maryland, even if you can have a non-compete provision, there are penalties if you apply them to the wrong people. So low wage earners in some states, in states where they ban non-competes, like Minnesota, I think it's a $10,000 fine. There's a private right of action plus attorney's fees, I believe. So you've got to brush these things off every year. We're still waiting on any FTC movement on banning non-competes nationwide. I think that's going to be tied up for a while. Anyway, I think we had a non-compete clocking in, I think, way back at the beginning when we started releasing these. So we wanted to update you and say, hey, this is becoming even more and more important. Brush off those, proprietary information agreements. Make sure that they are applicable in the right ways to the right people. Think about how you're applying them, who you're applying them to. And you really need to do this every year right now, because it's just the web we weave, right? They're important tools when things go awry. So I never tell clients, throw them all in the trash. Like, you really need to think about what happens if you're an employee jumps ship and, works on a proposal for another guy or tries to start their own business and solicit your clients. You want those tools for certain people, but you really should be rethinking how you deliver these things and whether they're enforceable in the states employees are working in.
Absolutely. And it's especially as we have a more of a remote workforce footprint, it's really important that each time you sign on someone in a new state, you do two things. You make sure that you understand the non-compete restrictions in that state, and you tailor your non-compete agreement to navigate those requirements, because it's not just the scope, and sometimes it's not as easy as just removing it. Often there are notice requirements, there are other pieces of information you need to give employees on a certain timeline that could really impact whether it's enforceable or not. And again, there are penalties for getting it wrong. So it's not just that you lose the ability to enforce that non-compete provision, but you potentially could be looking at liquidated damages, criminal charges in some states. So it's really important that you are being very mindful about how you're enforcing these things.
All right.
Well, good. Excellent. Well, thank you, Nicole, for the rundown. These things are complicated and changing quickly across many different states. So just try to stay on top of them before you go full warfare against an employee for violating something, because there could be consequences if you're trying to force something that's not really enforceable. It's been great meeting with you guys. We look forward to the next talk, and we'll see you soon.